everybody, my name is Matt. I'm a photographer living in Hawaii, and in this video we are going to take a look at masking 101. This is going to be the basic functions of masking. It's going to be a very slow-paced video, and you can actually get a copy of this photo that we're going to be looking at. Shoot me a DM on Instagram at InstamawiMatt, and I'm happy to send you a copy of the photo. Of course, it's only for editing purposes only. I just wanted to share this photo with you guys and show some of the basic functions of Lightroom masking and Photoshop masking. I would like to note that masking in Photoshop, we're going to be using the Camera Raw plugin. If you're not familiar with that, it might just be better for you to use Lightroom Classic, or pretty much any of the masking features are going to be identical between the programs. If I'm not mistaken, the same author or the same writer wrote both of the programs, so they are going to look extremely similar. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in, and we'll talk a little bit about masking and how we can use these tools to better your photos. This is the same exact photo. This is in Photoshop. This is what it looks like in Lightroom. Again, Photoshop and Lightroom. So if you see the screens look slightly different, that would be why. I just like to show both versions and how similar they are. I prefer to use Photoshop because I feel like there's more powerful tools for me to use when I'm editing my photos. This is a very basic, very basic version of masking. So if you're looking for something more complicated with some of like the luminosity masks and things like that, that's not really what this video is. But let's go ahead and start with Photoshop real quick here. I'm going to jump in and go into the Camera Raw filter. Now, as you can see, this is what Camera Raw plugin looks like for Photoshop. This is what Lightroom Classic looks like. So it's literally basically the same exact thing, with just some of the things are just slightly located in different spots, but again, they do the same exact thing. So let's start over with what masking is and just the generics of how you can use it in different ways. This video is going to build on top of each other. The point of the video is to not make this image anything spectacular. It's more so just to go over the tools in masking and how you can use them to further improve your images. I think it's extremely important to understand that just because I edit a photo a certain way doesn't mean that it works for you. Maybe you have different subjects. Maybe you don't like the way I do certain things. That's totally fine. As a photographer, you have the right to edit your photos however you want to. So we'll just start with that kind of comment real quick. Usually before I begin editing a photo, regardless whether it's in Photoshop or if it's in Lightroom, I do kind of like to inspect the image. So I'm going to pop over back into Photoshop real quick here. I'm going to go into the file information, and I just like to see what lens I shot it with. I just like to see the aperture. I'm just kind of guessing by the shallow depth of field here. This is probably a pretty open aperture. Let's see here. Yep, it's 3.5 aperture. I shot at 1/2000th of a second. ISO 2500, and I did shoot it in aperture priority mode. Sometimes I will go back and forth between aperture priority and shutter priority, but I shoot a lot in manual. So this was actually in Australia. I just came back from a trip, so I thought it'd be kind of cool to edit a photo, at least show you the masking. So you'll notice the compression in the photo. Telephoto lens, I shot it on the 300mm f2.8 lens, Unreal lens. If you get a chance to shoot with that, please make sure to take advantage of that. So the point of me just looking at this is just to kind of see where the photo is coming from and maybe why certain things look a certain way. Obviously 3.5 is a pretty open aperture for a 300mm lens, so I just think it's important to look at that real quick and just dissect your image a little bit. I'm not really going to do a whole ton with it, but it's just cool to kind of zoom in, take a look at your photo here. As you can see here, one of the main things I really like about this photo is this kangaroo's eye right here. As you can see, it's really brown and very punchy. I do remember shooting this. It was actually in horrendous lighting conditions, so I just thought it'd be kind of cool to pull it open and show you guys a little bit more about it. When we're masking as well too, the background separation that you're going to see here between the subject, which is the kangaroo, and the backdrop here is just completely obliterated. There was a lot of distance between the background and the subject here, so that's why you're going to see that really kind of wonky, bokeh, blown out background. So really cool. Great lens. I love this photo. I think it's a cool one just to show you guys how to use masks. So great. Now that we've dissected some of our image, I'm going to pop over into Lightroom. I think a lot of people, especially at the very beginning stages of their photography, are most likely going to be using Lightroom. I forced myself to use Photoshop. I spent a lot of time in my early time as a photographer forcing myself to use Photoshop, and I highly recommend the same thing for brand new beginner photographers. I think it is such a powerful program to use, but I understand the convenience of Lightroom is wonderful as well. But just know that the Camera Raw plugin that I've mentioned a few times looks exactly the same. So again, Camera Raw plugin, Lightroom. All right, so to get started, and once again, I'm not really editing this photo to make it anything spectacular. I'm just kind of showing you how to use the different masks and different ways that we can use masks to enhance your photo. So the masking feature is going to be located right here on the right-hand side of the screen. And you'll notice that we have quite a few different options here. So the first thing will be subject. So masks do not necessarily always work the way you want them to work. Sometimes you just have a photo that perhaps the subject is just too small, or it's in an awkward position in the photo, and it cannot identify the subject. So I'm going to try to press the subject button right here in hopes that it's going to grab my subject, which is the kangaroo. So let's try it. And it's selecting the subject. There it goes. I personally have my mask set to this red tone. You can change it by going over here and changing it to whatever color you want. I find red to be a pretty noticeable color when I'm editing, so I do like that quite a bit. Anytime we're adding a mask to a photo, it's basically selecting a very specific subject, or it's targeting a region on your subject or the area that you're selecting. So also something that we can do just to kind of show you is we could add a random mask, such as a radial gradient, randomly just over here. Let's say I wanted to edit this part of the photo. I want nothing to do with my subject. You can edit that way as well. So just because you are using luminosity mask doesn't mean that you have to be editing your subject. You can do all sorts of really cool things with these masks, and I think it's just important that you're aware that you don't have to use a mask just for the subject. I use it in a variety of different ways, including adding contrast to the backdrop and things of that nature. So the next option we can do is sky. Now, as you can probably guess from this photo here, there is not a sky in this photo. It's very noticeable. I have a subject. I'm shooting slightly against a hill. There's a small little hill right here in Australia. I was shooting at this national park, and there was a mound of grass, and just like a big kind of like hill, and then there was a big cliff that dropped right down to the ocean. So I don't have a sky in this. So this is a great example of, if you click it, it may not find anything. So here we go. No sky detected. Okay, well, there's no sky for it to find, so it's probably not going to be able to select it. Let's go over to another photo that I have. Let's see. All right, so let's take a look at this photo here where it's very visible. There is a sky. I'll probably say this about 1,000 times during this, is that this is not going to be a perfect every single time that you're looking to grab the sky. So Here we go. Let's click on sky and see if it identifies the sky. It sure did. Look, all of this red here. You'll notice that it didn't grab a portion. There's like little spaces here that are not red, so you notice that it didn't grab those. We'll take a look into that later. Now let's go into, let's see if I can grab a subject. So remember in the first one, we grabbed the kangaroo by going to select subject. Let's see if this identifies a subject. In this case, it did. It grabbed the wave here and then the surfer, so that's great. So I don't know what photos you're taking. I don't know if it's people. I don't know whether it's landscape. I don't know if your subjects are really small on the screen. I don't know if they're really big in the screen on your photo. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, and it's just important to understand that not every single time you click on select subject or select sky or background, it's going to select exactly what you want. I don't want to make any changes to there. So this is, again, the photo that we're going to be talking about. For me, I find this easier to edit in Photoshop, so I'm going to kind of stick to that. But again, you can find the same exact controls in Lightroom. So in Camera Raw here or in Lightroom, again, we went over subject, we went over sky, and now background. Well, through process of elimination, you probably, well, actually you can just hover over this like this. As you can see, when you select the background, ideally it's going to be selecting only the background, and it does not include the subject. So when you're making any type of adjustments, it's only going to be the areas in red that are going to be adjusting. So let's take a look at an example here. So let's say I want the background to be really dark. Okay, well, I'm just going to lower my blacks, for example. Notice how it's only affecting changes in the mask. That's exactly what the point of it is. It's not going to change anything with the subject at all. So I'm just going to lower the exposure. I think the background in this case was a bit bright, and my decision as an editor is to lower that portion of the photo, and that's what I'm going to do. You can change any of these settings here. You can change the highlights. You can raise the whites, lower the whites. You could change the blacks. You could raise the blacks. You can do whatever adjustments you want to do in the mask. So every time you do a mask, you can do different adjustments. It's very easy to do, and if you keep scrolling, there's all sorts of options with texture, with clarity. However you wish to edit this photo, you can do in a mask. So this is a background mask. So let's do a different mask, and let's say I want to select the subject now. I want my subject to be a little bit brighter. I don't like the way it currently is, and let's say I just wanted to raise it up just a tiny bit, the shadows, give a little bit more exposure. Great. You can change the temperature, you can change the color. So just like we did with the background, you can select a different mask and do different edits. To make a new mask, all you have to do is click on Create New Mask and tell it what you want to do. Now, sometimes you have an object in your photo. In my case, this is really just the kangaroo. My object is the subject. So let's say you have a big wooden box back here that you wanted to add a mask to because it stands out in the photo. Well, you can simply click on Select Object. You can increase or decrease the size of any of these using the brackets. Make it smaller, make it bigger. Generally, I don't like to use a really big selection tool like that. I think it's a little too big. You can just now select your object. This is kind of helpful too. Sometimes your program will not select the subject. So I go into select object and then I highlight, I go around it like I just did, and it does the same exact thing. So there's two different ways to get the same exact result. So let's go ahead and delete this mask just for editing purposes. Now, there's a couple other different masks that I would like to talk about. I use these quite a bit in different ways. So if you create a new mask, there is something called a radial gradient. This essentially is a circular mask. It doesn't have to take any specific shape or size. I mean, it's generally rounded. So I'm just clicking and dragging, and then you can always readjust it using these arrows here. So let's say I want it really thin, but I need it to go the other way. You can rotate it. You can expand it. You can tilt it. You can do pretty much anything you want with it. So again, when you're editing using a mask, it's going to only edit what you have in the selected area, which is this red area here. So similar to the other mask that we did, if I want to increase the exposure, great. If I want to lower the highlights, you can do that. If you want to raise the shadows up a little bit, you can do that. And that's that simple. Okay, now the next option that we're going to look into in masking is called a linear gradient. So if we create a new mask and go into linear gradient, just like the name sounds, it's going to create a line. So I'm going to click on linear mask. I'm going to click and drag in any direction that you wish to go. You can go from up to down, you can go left to right, you can go diagonal from the left, you can go diagonal from the right, any direction. So it's just like a radial gradient. You can rotate it, you can expand it, you can contract it. I really like this option a lot because it really can feather your light or your adjustment that you're making. And what I mean by feather is that you can see on the right side of my screen right now, it is very deep dark red. That's when the adjustments are going to take place the most. And as we move to the left here towards my subject, you can see that the red starts to fade off. So let's take a look at the best way I can show this to you is that I'm going to increase my exposure significantly. And what you will notice is that the edges, or more to the right of my screen based on this linear gradient, is going to be really white, and then it's going to kind of feather out as my subject, as the gradient gets closer to the subject. So you can see right here on the right how the far right side of the screen is extremely white, and I'm going to keep increasing it, keep increasing it, keep increasing it, and notice how it hasn't even touched really my subject yet. One cool thing about these gradients is that you can adjust them. So like I said, if you go here, you can rotate it if you want. And notice now towards the bottom of the screen, more and more and more of the light is affecting my subject. If I turn it the other way, now the top of the ears are affected, now the head is affected, now the rest of the body is getting affected. Obviously, this is a very extreme example. I can't say that you would never want to do this in your edits, but again, this is just for an example purpose. So I do not really wish to have, for this particular edit, I don't wish to have it very bright. I'm just going to turn it down a little bit, and I'm just going to say that I'm happy with it. It's totally fine. One other thing that you can do with this is move your gradient. So just because it's stuck here doesn't mean that you can't move it. You simply grab in the center right here and you can move over your filter. So let's do the same exercise again now that it's closer or further to the left. Notice how the adjustment is affecting more of my subject now compared to what it was doing earlier. In this example, I do think when you're looking at a photo, the direction of the light is really important. So if you'll notice on the left side of this kangaroo as he's looking at us is brighter than the right side of the kangaroo. So you probably have a good guess that there's lighting coming from this side here, the left side of the image, down to the right side of the image, and it's going to be darker over here. Now let's take a look. So the moral of that story was, sorry, I didn't finish my thought, was that it's important to understand lighting, and this comes with experience and just time at editing photos. making one side of a photo bright completely to the opposite side of where the light is coming from may not really work the best. So let's say I wanted to try to match that level of brightness on the left side of the kangaroo, but to the right side of the photo. As you can see here, it just kind of looks off. It just doesn't, I'm trying to balance it out, but it just kind of looks weird. Well, that's just the lighting, and it wasn't designed to be lit that way. So, but as a creative, maybe that's what you want to do. I don't care. I mean that in the nicest way, but however you want to edit the photo, you can do so. So now that we have a couple different masks here, I want to show you how we can go back and edit them. The first thing that I want to adjust is I want to make this mask, this right side, less bright. So if you recall, we just did that. So we can go into the mask right here, and if you hover over it, it will show you what the mask is. So it's kind of cool that you can see which edit you're going to adjust. You don't have to make another mask. I mean, you could. I could go in here, make a mask, go here, do this again, and then lower the highlights. I don't really find that necessarily be the best option for me. I think you already have a mask, so what you can do is, let's say you just want to completely delete a mask, is just click on these little, I think they call it the hamburger icon right there, and then you'll want to delete mask. Let's go into this mask here, because this is the one that we were talking about earlier, and it's significantly too bright. I can lower it. Let's say I want to go into my subject. I want to make it a tiny bit brighter. Well, click on your subject mask here, or any of the other masks that you wish to edit. Let's say I want to edit this one and make it slightly brighter, just a tiny bit. You can do so. You can go in and edit any of these by simply hovering over it, clicking it, and then making adjustments. So as we've learned, every mask, you can edit a specific portion of the photo using that mask. You can do the background with it. You can do a circular radial gradient with it. You can do a linear gradient. There's a few tips that I have that I personally like to do in my photos in certain circumstances. I like to make my subject pop a little bit more. I don't really necessarily think this will be the absolute best example for this, but let's give it a go. I really want my background, which is where my subject is, just the background to be a little bit more contrasty, or a little bit brighter actually. So we'll create a new mask. And yes, I already did create a radial gradient mask, but I want this one to be a little bit bigger. But as I just said, I don't want my subject to be brighter. I just want the background to be brighter. And this is where a really cool feature comes in your radial gradient mask, or sorry, any of your masks, is you can add or subtract. And we already know that I do not want my subject, which is the kangaroo, to be adjusted in this particular scenario. So what I will do is click subtract. It is asking me now what I wish to subtract. I wish to subtract a subject. If I click on that, the mask still remains on the outskirts behind the kangaroo, but the mask does not affect the actual subject or the kangaroo in this particular case. So now, if you can see, I'm going to do an extreme example. If I lower this, it's only affecting the area that I selected, which was in the red, which was the mask. So that's kind of cool. So this is something that, as I said, I do like to do oftentimes with my subject, is I like to brighten up a little bit behind the subject in order for my subject to pop a little bit more. Here's the mask. Again, we just did the background only. Another cool thing that we can do in this example, let's say I wish to select my subject but I would also like a little bit around it to be changed as well. So essentially this is going to be opposite of what we did. We subtracted the subject because I didn't want to keep the subject, I didn't want my subject to be edited in this case. But now let's say I have a subject in a photo that I do wish to add a little bit more to the mask. So my subject is selected and I click on Add. Now, let's say I wish to make the bottom of the photo a little bit brighter as well, in addition to my subject. So I added a new mask, and as you can see, I now have two different masks selected. I have the subject and the linear gradient that I just added here. So now, if I go to make any adjustments, see how it's affecting the bottom of the photo and the subject all at the same time. That's kind of cool. That's kind of a cool little feature. You can go in and adjust these at any time. So this is not something that you are forced to keep. Just because you do it once doesn't mean that it's done. Again, we've looked at this a few times, but I think it's important to go over it again. Let's say I want to edit just the subject. I can go back and edit him just a little bit more if I want to, and notice how it's only affecting what's in the mask. So hopefully that makes a good deal of sense here. Every time you add a mask, you can change any of the settings here. This is not global adjustments. And what I mean by global adjustments is if there's no mask selected, essentially your whole photo is your canvas, and it's going to globally adjust your photo everywhere. There may be times where you don't want to do that, and the masks come in handy for that. Again, clicking on the mask, your mask will still be present here, and you can go in and adjust anything that you wish. Let's take a look at a slightly different example. This subject does have eyes, it has nose, it has a face. Unfortunately, Photoshop or Lightroom is not really going to recognize this as a person. It's pretty smart. And normally if you had a subject right here, it would recognize the subject and it would come up right here and say, hey, look, there's a person. Let's go back over to, I'm going to cancel out of here. I'm going to go over into Photoshop here, and I do have an example somewhere here. Here we are. We have a subject, and I want to make very specific adjustments to skin, to face, to eyebrows, anything like that. You'll do the same exact thing. Go into masks. Select subject. Now you'll notice that Photoshop or Lightroom is already recognizing right here, hey, there's a person. I see a person. So if I click on the person, there's different edits now that we can do. As you'll see here, I can click on facial skin, body skin, eyebrows, and it's going to go through anything that it can find. In this case, my subject does not have any teeth present. His mouth is closed, so there's no teeth. But it will recognize other things like lips, the iris, sclera, eyebrows, body skin. So it's really cool how you can go in and target specific regions of your subject's face. As you can imagine, for a portrait photographer or anyone who's doing a lot of work with people just in general, this is a really cool feature. So let's say I want to go in and adjust the sclera. Did I say sclera? I think I said sclera. I'm not sure why I said that. Anyways, we are going to go in and edit the eyes of the subject. Anytime you have a fine adjustment, don't stay zoomed out. You can't see what's going on when your screen is like, the subject is that small on your screen. I've got a pretty big iMac Studio or a Mac Studio here. I still can't see it. If you zoom in, you can see what the heck you're doing much better. So make sure to do that. Zoom in. Don't be afraid. Like look at it. you can now make an adjustment to the mask right here. So you can see the white part of the eye is getting brighter, it's getting darker. One thing that I do recommend doing, however, is toggling back and forth to make sure that you are satisfied with the mask and that it's not too bright. So for example, like let's say I make these eyes really, really, really bright. Just looking at your photo, you can tell that it's too bright. Like that looks very unnatural. It doesn't look good. So we can go back into the mask and adjust it and keep adjusting it. I don't need them to be crazy eyes or anything. I want them to be nice eyes that when you look at the photo, boom, that's where your eyes are going to. So similar to the other mask that we did, we can go back in and let's say I wish to, I guess we can go back to the subject if you wish. Now notice how this looks a little different because there's no like pull down menu here. If you go back out, create mask, go into people, there's a big difference. Well, your subject could be a person. So you kind of have to play around with this a little bit and kind of get comfortable with the editing flow, if you will. So let's say now I wish to do some of the facial skin. I want the skin to be a little bit brighter and create. Now, as you can see, it did not grab all of the skin because there is facial hair, so that could be part of the reason. So a really cool feature in the masking tool is called brush. So similar to a radial gradient or a linear gradient, there's another one called brush. What the brush is essentially is a paint tool, and we can add by clicking and dragging and moving around, making adjustments. Whoops, making adjustments. We can also do the same thing with subtracting. Brush. Maybe I don't want to have, there's just like little parts right here that I just don't want it to adjust. Great, you can subtract it as well too. That's a great example of two different images getting two different results in Photoshop or in Lightroom with the masking. So you do not necessarily have access to all of the tools depending on what your subject is. You'll have access to them. Select people, for example, on my photo of the kangaroo. It's still there. We can still go into here and we can still try to find people, but it's not recognizing this as a person, so that option is not going to be available. So it can be a little tricky, a little finicky sometimes, and I think it's important to understand that I'm editing multiple different types of subjects, so a lot of photographers will kind of concentrate on portraits or landscape. I shoot a big variety of different subjects, so these are things that you just kind of learn over the course of time. Obviously, if I tried to select the human skin, it's probably not going to recognize this in this photo. So if I go into masks, and it's saying, yeah, I can't really find anybody. I know it's there. I know that this is the subject, but it's not going to be able to find eyes because it's simply the subject is just too small in the photo. There could be too much going on. So keep that in mind. Let's take a look. Here's a great example. This is Billy Kemper. This is a great example of how I use the mask to brighten behind the subject, but keeping my subject still a little bit on the dark side. So this is actually the mountain range behind it, and there was definitely some brightness happening here with the waves and the mist and the sun starting to set. So this is a great example of using different techniques such as masking to get great results in your edits. In Photoshop, you can see all of these like little edits that I did to get this. Sometimes you don't need to do a ton of edits to get amazing photos, and other times you do. So now what I would like to do is take you through and we're going to practice some exercises here going back to our kangaroo photo. So we're going to go in to our masking and we're going to start to edit things. Let's go ahead and select our subject. The kangaroo is selected. I'm going to make him a little bit darker. I think he's a little bit overexposed. You can make any adjustments that you wish. If you want to maybe change your highlights down a little bit. So see how the outskirts of the left side of the kangaroo, right over here, that really changes your photo. In my particular case, the sun was coming in pretty hot and the intensity of the sun was pretty bright. So I wish to kind of lower my highlights a little bit. Who knows? Maybe when I'm editing this, I'm going to raise the highlights. I don't know. I do not always have a clear vision in my head what I'm doing with the photo. I like to let the photo take me on an editing journey. So maybe you already have a vision for how you wish to edit this photo. For me, I don't know where I'm going with this. We're literally doing this right now together. Now, let's go ahead and since we know that the sun essentially is coming down like this, I wish to maybe make a little bit more contrast on the other side. We kind of did that a little bit earlier when we were discussing it. I wish to make this a little bit more feathered. I don't want to do a lot, but there's brights on this side. There's shadows on this side. I think I just wanted to first see what's hiding in the highlights here. Nothing really too much. I'm just going to lower the exposure slightly. And I'm happy with that. Now, a really cool little tool is using the backslash button. This is going to give you before, after. Before with the original photo, after the edit. I like to do that throughout my editing process so I can really hone in on what I'm looking at on my subject and just making sure my subject pops. And in order for me to pop my subject, I do a lot of, well, not necessarily a lot, but I do a series of masks and it takes time and that's okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is grab my radial gradient here. I am going to create more backlight behind my subject. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to make a pretty nice big radial gradient there. And I only want to adjust the back of the kangaroo, the background. I don't want to make a global adjustment to my gradient like that. I would like to subtract my subject, and I only wish to increase the exposure behind the kangaroo, just slightly. And then I hit enter. And then what I'll do is I'll hit the backslash button. Now, there's a very noticeable difference between where I started and where I'm currently at, especially with the radial gradient behind the kangaroo. It really helps identify what your eyes are being trained to look at by simply brightening it up slightly. If I go back to this mask here, I only raise this about a half a stop of light. Maybe you wish to lower it a half a stop or more. Let's say if I lower it. I think this is a great point to look at is by going back and forth. I can tell that the original just seems to look nicer to me. I don't like that really dark backdrop. And for that reason, that's why I recommend playing with it a little bit and seeing what you like the most. I'm comfortable with that. Before, after, before, after. I like that quite a bit. Very good. Next, what I really liked is during our conversation is I grabbed my subject and then I wanted to add a linear gradient on the bottom This is oftentimes a nice little trick that you can do in editing. A lot of people will darken the very bottom of the photo. In this case, I just want to experiment around a little bit. I kind of want to bump up the shadows just a tiny bit. And let's bump this up just a little bit and see. So instead of darkening it like we just talked about, I actually raised it up a little bit. I think that looks pretty nice. Let's try darkening just the bottom of the photo now, like we were talking about using our linear gradient. And this way, what it's really going to help us do is kind of draw our eyes up here more rather than down here. I do find the hands, because they're very contrasty, right? It's a very light colored body, and then it has these dark claws, and their hands are a little kind of punchy in the photo. So what I think I want to do is maybe just darken it just a little bit and see how we like that. I quite like that. Where we started, where we're currently at, where we started, where we're currently at. Kind of cool. Next, let's go ahead and use our radial gradient again. And we're just going to create, I don't want to call it sunshine, but I'm just going to make this a little bit brighter over here on this section. So as you can see, we've got all of this like wooded area over here, and the sun is coming from this angle. So I'm just going to make it just a little bit brighter over there. Not a ton, but it definitely helps. As you can, it kind of flows into the lighting behind the kangaroo that we did. Now let's say we're done with masks. Let's say we've masked this photo as much as we want to do, and now we wish to make some global adjustments. Well, if you click on your mask button, all of the masks that we did are here. There's a radial gradient, we darkened the bottom, we did the subject and the linear gradient, we did the lighting behind, we did to the right of it. Let's just say we're done. We're done with the masks. Let's just say we don't want to do anything else to your photo. And let's say we want to add a little vignette, so we can do that. Sure, you can add a little vignette to the side here. And notice what it did to your eyes when you did that is it really honed you in closer to the subject. Here's where we started. Here's where we ended. So you notice that little tiny slight vignette. It's a global adjustment to the whole entire photo that we did that made a really big difference. We can also create a vignette using masks as well. If we create a mask, radial gradient, and what vignetting is it's really just the corners, right? It's just dialing in just the corners. Well, as we learned, when you make adjustments to a mask, it only applies to the area in the mask. So in this case, the red. So if I wanted to add a vignette which darkens the corners and I lower the exposure, it's only making the adjustment to the area in the mask. So obviously that's not what we are looking to do. There's a really cool little button that we have not talked about yet called the invert mask. What that's going to do is it's going to take the mask selection and transpose it basically. It's going to flip it. So see, now the mask is no longer on the inside of the selected mask. It's on the outside of the mask. This is not my preferred way to do vignetting. There's a vignette option already in our features, so I don't necessarily use this a ton, but I just wanted to show you the invert option, and you can create that as well. You can still adjust your mask. Like let's say you want to make this mask really big, and great. Before, after, before, after. There's still some work to be done on this photo. We didn't even really touch any white balance. We didn't touch any kind of finer details in this, but that's okay. This photo is here for you to use and for you to practice your masks on. There's all sorts of little ways that you can use masks, and maybe you use them differently than I would use them. Maybe you're going to edit this photo completely different than I would. I don't know, and that's okay, because you can do whatever you want to do with this photo. Hopefully this information has been helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And once again, you can access this image. Just shoot me a message on Instagram at InstaMauiMatt, and I'd be happy to send you this photo, and then you can play around with it accordingly. Have an awesome day. Aloha. Ahui ho.